Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the exalted one,
Recording in progress.
the worthy one, the supremely enlightened one. Chattaro bhikkhave dhamma katame chattaro atti bhikkhave dhamma abhinya parinyeya atti bhikkhave dhamma abhinya pahatabban Atti bhikkhave dhamma abhinya bhave tabba. Atti bhikkhave dhamma abhinya saccika tabbati. The most venerable Mahasangha, Bhikkhunis, friends in the Dhamma, this moment we have selected the topic Abhinna Sutta, the wonder of wisdom. The Supreme Buddha explained here what we do as wise persons. The highest result that we receive through our wisdom or understanding. This discourse completely focuses on Panya or wisdom. Wisdom is the main topic in Buddhism. The reason is that we have been coming for a long time from birth to birth because of ignorance. Anamata goyam bhikkhave sansaro pubbha kotina panyayati. Buddha says, because of ignorance and craving, we are born from birth to birth. In this situation, we have to understand the nature of ignorance and the path that leads to getting rid of ignorance. For that, Buddha has explained the nature of Panya or wisdom. Wisdom is highly appreciated and recommended in Buddhism. There are many synonyms that we can see for Panya or wisdom. Aloka, Vidya, Amoha, those are the words. Dhammavicaya and Chakku. There are many synonyms that we can see in Buddhism for Panya or wisdom. In this discourse, the Supreme Buddha explains the highest benefits that we receive through our direct knowledge, supramundane knowledge. By born, we have received wisdom by listening to Dhamma, and by practicing Dhamma, we are able to develop our wisdom to the maximum level. That should be our main purpose of everyone who was born in this world. Here Buddha says, Chattaro bhikkhave dhamma. There are 4 things. Katame chattaro. What for? Atti bhikkhave dhamma abhinya parinyeya. There are things to be fully understood by direct knowledge. Atti bhikkhave dhamma abhinya pahatabba. There are things to be abandoned by direct knowledge. Atti bhikkhave dhamma abhinya bhavetabba. There are things to be developed by direct knowledge. Atti bhikkhave dhamma abhinya saccika. There are things to be realized by direct knowledge or supramundane knowledge. When you are listening to these four things, what comes to your mind? What are these four things in short? Yes, very good. As soon as you are listening to these four things, you should know this is the way how Buddha explained the Four Noble Truths. That is the skill that you have to develop in this discussion. Ati bhikkhave dhamma abhinya parinyaya. Buddha says there are things to be fully understood by direct knowledge. There are some things that we have to understand with our supramundane knowledge. What they are? What we should understand with our supramundane knowledge? The five aggregates subject to clinging. And also ati bhikkhave dhamma abhinya pahatabba. There are some things we should overcome with our supramundane knowledge. What they are? Avidya bhavatanha, ignorance and craving for existence. Again, Buddha says, Ati bhikkhave dhamma abhinya bhavetabba. There are things that we have to develop. What they are? Samatocha vipassanacha, serenity and insight, or concentration and insight meditation. And ati bhikkhave dhamma abhinya sachikatabba. There are some things that we have to realize with our supramundane knowledge. They are vidya vimukti, knowledge and liberation. Can you understand the order of these four things? What is the first one? Yes, dukkha satya, the noble truth of suffering. How about the second one? Second one? Samudaya satya, yes. The noble truth of the origin of suffering. How is the next one? Look at again, very carefully. Look at your handout very carefully. Which satya? Actually, we have talked a lot about these four things. I am so sad.
We want that to cease.
The third one, ati bhikkhave dhamma abhinya bhavetabba. What is that? What is the truth? Magga satya. Magga satya, the noble truth of the path that leads to getting rid of suffering. And also the fourth one, ati bhikkhave dhamma abhinya sachikatabba. What is the truth? Nirodha satya. Why I ask that question? We usually think that there is an order when we listen to Four Noble Truths. Sometimes we have heard in sermons, some speaker says, Buddha says only this order, dukkha, samudaya, nirodha, magga. No options. But this is a good example. Sometimes we can see the order is not same. Here Buddha explained dukkha, samudaya, magga, nirodha. That is very important. The reason is that if we understand one thing, we can understand other things too. In this sutta, the order is different. Dukkha, Samudaya, Magga, Nirodha. These are the places we should see very clearly and sensitively. This is the place where you can show your skill. We can ask some questions after the speech. But very important thing, when we listen to something at the moment, we should be very careful and sensitive about the information in the sermon. That is very important. These are the things that we can do with our supramundane knowledge or our direct understanding, direct knowledge. Sometimes Buddha has explained one truth, only dukkha satya. Sometimes Buddha has explained samudaya satya and magga satya. Sometimes Buddha explains samudaya satya and nirodha satya. Sometimes, as we discussed yesterday, Jata Sutta, Buddha explained magga satya and nirodha satya. This is the skill we should develop through listening to Dhamma. When we listen to a sermon, as I mentioned yesterday, as listeners, we should understand here, we listening to whether the path of heaven or the path of deliverance. And also again, we should understand when someone explains Vimukti Magga, the path of deliverance, we should understand that person explains which truths, dukkha satya or samudaya satya, magga satya, nirodha satya, among them, what kind of truths that this person explains. We should understand it. That is very important. First of all, Buddha says we should understand the five aggregates with our direct knowledge. Actually, even though it says direct knowledge, without associating good friends or noble association or spiritual friendship, we are unable to understand these four things. If you are Jata Sotapanna or Jata Sakadagami, it is okay. We don't need to listen to Dhamma. We can develop other steps of spirituality. But if our Putujana, we have to listen to Buddha's message, especially Four Noble Truths. Understanding the Four Noble Truths leads us to go forward on the path of liberation. The Four Noble Truths are highly appreciated in Buddhism. If someone doesn't know the meaning of Four Noble Truths, he is in a very much darkness. Buddha explains the Dhammagaru Sutta. In this universe, in the galaxies, there are some places where we are unable to see the lights, the sunlight. There are some very black or dark places, very much darkness. There also some beings are born. They live there, they die there. But scientists, they say that wherever no sunlight, no water, no beings. That is the perspective of scientists. But Buddha's message is not like that. Even though scientists are unable to see those beings, there are some beings at that places. However, Buddha says, in Dhammagaru Sutta, Buddha says, that is the highest or much darkness in this world. In Pali it says, Antarikha Aga, or black hole. There are some very dark places in this sky. We are unable to see lights. Buddha says there are more darkness in this world. What is that? That is the unknowing of the Four Noble Truths. If a person doesn't know the real meaning of the Four Noble Truths, that is the more darkness than that darkness in the Antarika Niraya, Antarik Saga. Therefore, always Buddha explains the Four Noble Truths for our understanding with great compassion and great wisdom. And also Buddha says, if a person can understand Four Noble Truths, if he has a person who listening to his words, he should explain that message to him too. And also in Abhinna Sutta, Buddha says, if you have a friend, if you really love him or her, your duty is to explain this message. If you are so compassionate. That is why the gift of Dhamma excels all other gifts. The gift means explaining the Four Noble Truths. That is the real gift. Here, now we are going to explain these four things. Atti bhikkave dhamma aviññā pariññaya. There are things to be fully understood by direct knowledge, which are the five aggregates subject to clinging. Or understanding the first noble truth, dukkha satya, the noble truth of suffering. Sometimes Buddha explains the dukkha satya as jatipi dukkha, jarapi dukkha, vyadipi dukkha, maranapi dukkha, like that. Birth is suffering, decay is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, so on. Buddha explains in short, in simple, the nature of dukkha satya. When Buddha goes to the deeper level, he explains Sankirtena Panchupadana Khanda Dukkha. In short, associating five aggregates is suffering. Again, Buddha says 6 internal senses are the first noble truth. According to Abhinna Sutta, in Satya Samyutta in Samyutta Nikaya, Buddha explains the first noble truth, the noble truth of suffering, as 6 senses. If a person can understand 6 senses and 6 external objects, it is the place where he can understand the first truth, the noble truth of suffering. According to Sammaditthi Sutta, explained by Venerable Sariputta, he explained 16 ways how we can understand the Four Noble Truths. If a person can understand ahara or nutrition or food, he is able to understand the dukkha satya. If a person can understand suffering, that is also a place he can understand the suffering. If a person can understand avidya, that is also a place where we can understand the Four Noble Truths. If a person can understand sankhara, mental formations, that is also a place we can understand the noble truth of suffering. If a person can understand vijnana or consciousness, namarupa, mentality and materiality, and salayatana, 6 senses, passa, contact, vedana, feeling, these are the places that we can understand the first noble truth, the noble truth of suffering. But we usually have heard that understanding Jatipi dukkha, jarapi dukkha, and Sankitena Panchupadana is the way how to understand the First Noble Truth, but that is only one way. There are many ways the Buddha has explained how we can understand the First Noble Truth. If a person can understand a truth among the Four Noble Truths, he is able to understand other Noble Truths too. Four of them are interrelated. And here, in short, if we can understand the very first experience, that when we contact something through our senses, the very first experience is the noble truth of suffering. That is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. That is neither wholesome nor unwholesome. That is just a vipaka or result of our previous mental states. That first experience should be understood. Buddha never says us to overcome the noble truth of suffering. We can never overcome the first noble truth. First noble truth is the result of our previous mental states. First noble truth is the very first contact experience. That is not the fault. That is not the cause of suffering. That is same to even Arhantas too. The first noble truth should be understood by our direct understanding. For that we have to listen to Buddha's message from spiritual association, good association, noble association. And these five aggregates, it means Rupa, form, Vedana, feelings, Sanya, perception, Sankhara, mental formations, and Vijnana, consciousness. These five things arise together at the moment. But we should understand very clearly, these five things appear several places in same names. That is why we should be very careful and wise. If we are not wise, we may misunderstand. When we discuss Vijnana, in one place Buddha says, Vijnanam parisuddham, pakati parisuddhamidam Vijnanam chittam. Vijnana consciousness, as a nature, it is pure. That consciousness is the very first experience consciousness of five aggregates. That is not a fault. That should not be overcome or removed. That very pure consciousness should be understood. That is the first noble truth of suffering. But sometimes we can say there is a consciousness, Mayopamancha Vijnana. Like a magic, there is a consciousness. That is the origin of suffering. That should be overcome. That should be abandoned. Vijnana name is same. The word is same. Letters are same. But the meaning is completely different. That is the second experience as Ajnana Charya, according to Charya Nanat Jnana. That consciousness subject to clinging. That is not just Vijnana Kanda, but that is Vijnana Upadana Kanda. That is the cause of suffering. That consciousness should be abandoned, overcome, removed. That is the Samudaya Satya. Somewhere we can see Buddha says Chittang Panyancha Bhavayam. Somewhere we have to develop Vijnana and Sanya. What is that? That Vijnana and Sanya consist with Panya or wisdom, that is Vipassana Bhavana or Magga Satya. That Magga Satya should be developed. Magga Satyan Bhavetabbang. But Vijnana name is same. Our senses also like that. We explain first our senses also the noble truth of suffering. Sometimes Buddha says we have to understand the chakku or the eye. Buddha says chakkum bhikkhave pariññeyam. The word is same. Another way Buddha says chakkum bhikkhave adittam and chakkum bhikkhave pahatabbam. What is the difference? Sometimes Buddha says chakkum bhikkhave pariññeyam. That is the very first eye in the first noble truth. That is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. That is neither wholesome nor unwholesome. That very first eye should be understood. It should not be abandoned. Again Buddha says, such as Abhinna Sutta, Chakkum bhikkhave adittam, Rupam bhikkhave adittam, Chakku vijnanam adittam, and Chakku sampassana adittam. What is that? That is the second noble truth, the origin of suffering, which consists of clinging. That should be abandoned. That is the Samudaya Satya. We can say in somewhere 5 aggregates as Dukkha Satya. And also somewhere we can say the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. Those are Pancha Upadana Khanda. That is the cause of suffering. Somewhere we can say Vijnana and Sanya consist with wisdom. Even Arhantas have consciousness. They have perception, Sanya. But they consist with wisdom. It is not the cause of suffering. After they attain enlightenment, furthermore, we live in this society. They have consciousnesses. They have perceptions. But that consciousness, that perception doesn't belong to clinging. That consciousness is always reflected on impermanence by them. That is not the cause of suffering. That should not be overcome. Here, we are discussing the Four Noble Truths. The second one, Buddha says, Atti bhikkhave dhamma abhinya pahatabba. There are things to be abandoned by direct understanding. What they are? Avidya bhava tanha, ignorance and clinging to existence. These should be abandoned, overcome. This is the Samudaya Satya. Here, Pancha Upadana Khanda, 5 aggregates subject to clinging. Trishna or craving is the nearest cause of suffering. But when we go to the path, we are unable to overcome craving. If we want to overcome craving or trishna, what should we do? We have to overcome Vedana feeling. Craving arises because of Vedana feeling. If we want to overcome feelings, what should we do? We have to overcome passa or contact. So on, we have to go to first. What is the very first cause? Avidya or ignorance. There we have to understand the Four Noble Truths. Again, we have to practice the Noble Eightfold Path. The second noble truth that here explains the origin of suffering, Samudaya Satya. We mostly see that the cause of suffering is that craving. Here Buddha says not only craving but ignorance too, avidya too. It means if you want to overcome craving, we have to go to the first, which is ignorance. Without reducing ignorance, we never overcome suffering. We never overcome craving. But some other religious people, ascetic people in Buddha's time, they thought that if they can overcome, they can live outside material world, they can attain liberation. That is why they gave up their properties, their relatives, friends. Finally, they gave up even their clothes too. But they couldn't attain the real liberation because the reason is inside. Clinging to five aggregates. The five aggregates subject to clinging. The reason or cause is inside. We have to overcome it. And the next one, Atti bhikkhave dhamma abhinya bhavetabba. There are things to be developed by direct understanding or supramundane understanding, knowledge. They are serenity and insight, or samatha vipassana, or tranquility and insight meditation. In short, this is the Magga Satya, the noble truth, but the path that leads to get rid of suffering. Here, Buddha says the path in short. In many discourses, we can see the path as the Noble Eightfold Path. But we can see differences. According to audience, Buddha has explained the path in various ways. Sometimes Buddha says you have to practice mindfulness or fourfold mindfulnesses. Sometimes Buddha says you have to practice three disciplines, Sila Samadhi Panya, as Jata Sutta explains. Sila Patittha Narosa Panya, that is the Magga, the path. Sometimes Buddha says, Sabbe Sankhara Anicchati Esamaggo Visuddhya. All conditioned things are impermanent, this is the path. Sabbe Sankhara Dukkhati Esamaggo Visuddhya. Sabbe Dhamma Anattati Esamaggo Visuddhya. Buddha says this is the path. Reflecting on anicca, dukkha, anatta. This is the path. In another way, Buddha says we have to practice 7 enlightenment factors, such as Sati Sambojjhanga, Dhammavijaya Sambojjhanga, Virya Sambojjhanga, so on. In various ways, according to the audience, Buddha and his noble disciples have explained the path in various ways. If we can refer many discourses and teachings of the Buddha, we can see this difference. The more we read and listen to Dhamma, the more we understand the many ways how to attain the path, how to attain the enlightenment. Here, Buddha says, as a wise person, the highest qualities that we can practice with our supramundane understanding is that practicing samatha and vipassana. This is the place where we can show our skillfulness, our skills. The duration of practicing samatha and vipassana. If we want to show our skills, we try to increase the duration of practicing samatha and vipassana with the clear understanding of the Four Noble Truths. The more we increase the duration of samatha and vipassana, the more we overcome suffering. The more we overcome suffering means the more we overcome ignorance and the craving to clinging. This is the place where we can show our skills. Next, Buddha explains the Nirodha Satya, or the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. Here the order is completely different. We have listening to this message as usual, Dukkha, Samudaya, Nirodha, Magga, but here Dukkha, Samudaya, Magga and Nirodha. That is very important. This is a very good example about the Four Noble Truths. And Nirodha means, Buddha says, Atte bhikkhave dhamma abhinya satchikatamba. There are things to be realized by direct understanding, direct comprehension. What is that? Vidya vimukti. Vidya means wisdom or understanding. Vimukti means liberation. These are the results. We can't acquire these results. As the result of practicing the path, we can receive these results. That is why Mahachattarisika Sutta explains Attanga samannagato seko dasanga samannagato araha. The seka person has 8 steps. The aseka or the enlightened one has other 2 things. Samma jnana, samma vimukti. This is the result. Results are received as the result of the practicing path. Here it is very clear that the Abhinna Sutta explains the wonder of wisdom. Actually, especially as monks, we do everything for our liberation. From our ordination to end of our life, we do everything in the name of liberation, emancipation, freedom, happiness. For that, this discourse, the Abhinna Sutta, which comes in Anguttara Nikaya, is very important. All the message that Buddha explained for 45 years can be summarized in this very discourse. The Abhinna Sutta. Dukkha Satya, understanding the 5 aggregates and abandoning ignorance and craving. Bhavetabbang, practicing serenity and insight. Achieving Vidya Vimukti, understanding or wisdom and liberation or emancipation. Here we should understand the main place, the very important place that we should be wise. When we think something, we should reflect on it that whether I am ignorant or wise. We can check ourselves. When we think something, a form has come to our mind. If our mind is fixed in a form, it means we are in the samsaric circle. It means we consist with jara, marana, decay and ignorance. Whenever we are wise and mindful, as soon as we remember something, if we are clever to understand, when a form comes to our mind, this form has already ceased. I understand this form with my mind consciousness. That mind consciousness also arises and ceases at the moment. Then we are free from suffering. We are associating with wisdom. We are in jnanacharya, wise behavior. If we want to increase the duration of wise behavior, we should understand the path. What is the path? The path is our best friend, mindfulness. That mindfulness is not just a alone thing that belongs to the Noble Eightfold Path, which starts with right understanding. Samadhi. Sammasati or right mindfulness should be a part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Mindfulness should start with understanding the Four Noble Truths. Without knowing the Noble Truth, the Four Noble Truths, even though we practice mindfulness, we can live in the present moment. We can reduce our stress. We can be happy at the moment, but we are not away from ignorance. We are still in the samsaric circle. That is why Buddha says, Janato aham bhikkhave passato asavanam kayam vadami no ajanato no apassato. In many discourses, Buddha emphasizes the importance of having right vision. The Buddha says, I proclaim the liberation for those who know the path, who see the path. What should be known? What should be seen? The Four Noble Truths. At the beginning, we should know the Four Noble Truths as Sutame Jnana, the knowledge of hearing. Then we practice it as Chintame Jnana, the knowledge of hearing. And also we practice it with meditation as Bhavana Jnana, the knowledge of meditation, practicing Samatha and Vipassana. Here it is very important to understand Samatha and Vipassana. Samatha is in the mundane state. Sometimes we are confused when we practice loving kindness meditation. We think that when I contemplate on may all beings be well, happy and peaceful, may my self-view or Sartha Sanya increases. Don't worry, this is only the primary step. We practice tranquility meditation for the concentration of our mind. That depends on the conventional truth. But we always practice serenity with the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. Therefore, we practice it Viveka-nisitang, Viraga-nisitang, Nirodha-nisitang, Vasaga-parinami. That is very clear. Samatha or concentration is not the final goal of the Buddha's disciples. That is only the middle. That middle is excellent, but that is not the end. When the mind gains concentration, we reflect on impermanence. What we heard from spiritual association, Buddha association. The more our mind gains concentration, the more we reflect on impermanence and the Four Noble Truths. There, we reflect on impermanence about 5 aggregates, 6 senses, 6 external objects, Nama-rupa, mentality and materiality. These are the places where we can practice impermanence. When we practice impermanence, gradually we release from outside material world. As soon as we recognize something outside world, we know very well the outside world has already ceased when I recognize something. Then outside world is unable to bring us suffering. We have released our mind from outside material world. Whenever our mind is fixed in outside world, it means we are controlled by outside. We have no real freedom, emancipation, liberation. Buddha has explained the path, how we attain the real liberation, emancipation that we can make within us. If we have this refuge, we don't need to depend on outside. Then we can be proud of our understanding. We are like birds who are very free. But we receive that freedom with understanding. Understanding the limits. Since we have virtue, we are not away from virtue or sila. Anumastesu vajjesu bhayadassavi. We see the fear as a very slight wrong activity. And also we don't do any slight wrong conduct censored by the wise. That is the freedom. If we do bad deeds, we have no freedom. Anytime we have to go to jail. If we don't have those mistakes or misbehaviors, that is the place really we receive the freedom. Buddha has pointed the real path of emancipation, liberation. If we know this path, actually we can practice it and we can gain the real liberation, emancipation. However, we know very well, we live in the ordinary society. We associate with them, but without defilements that they have. Physically, we associate with them, but mentally we are away from them. We are free from them. Our understanding is very high. We always contemplate on 5 aggregates as impermanent. This discourse, the Abhinna Sutta, the Supreme Buddha has explained the Four Noble Truths in short and clearly. Not only Four Noble Truths are explained here, but the Buddha explained the path very clearly. What we should understand, what are the things we have to overcome or abandon, what are the things we have to practice, and also what are the things we achieve or realize. Vijayamukti. The more we practice this path, serenity and insight, the more we receive understanding or wisdom and attain liberation. In the primary level, when we overcome some mistakes or when we practice sila, we can see the results. When we practice samatha, we can see the results. We can overcome 5 hindrances. When we practice or reflect on impermanence, we are able to overcome samyojana or fetters. This is the way. Then little by little, we can go forward, reducing and abandoning negativities from our mind. Finally, we have to practice only one thing, which is that reflecting on 5 aggregates as impermanent, as dissatisfactory, and as selfless. Buddha says, I explain only one advice for worldlings or putujana and seekers who are still training, and even arahantas who have completed training. I explain only one message, one advice for everyone, which is that reflecting on 5 aggregates. Even someone attains enlightenment, he has completed everything, he is katakicha, anupada sadatta, ohita bhara, but he also has to do something for this immediate life success, which is that contemplating on impermanence of 5 aggregates for the Ditta Dhamma Sukha Viharana. Okay, dear friends in the Dhamma, we have come to the end. We explained the Abhinna Sutta, the wonder of wisdom, explained by the Blessed One. This is the way how we receive the results using our wisdom. As a wise person, if we have to do something for our liberation, everything is here, in short. If you are so wise, actually I think this discourse is very, very important. When we see the Buddha's discourses, this Abhinna Sutta, Karanimetta Sutta, and Mahasatipatthana Sutta, these 3 things are very, very important. If we understand and practice at least these 3 discourses, I think that is enough. Karanimetta Sutta explains the ethics or discipline, and Abhinna Sutta explains the pattern, and also Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the great discourse of mindfulness, explains the path with details. If we can continuously read, learn, and practice these 3 discourses, actually we are so fortunate. We can receive a lot. And day by day, we can go forward, reducing suffering and developing, achieving our inner peace, liberation, emancipation. For that, I wish you all the best. I really appreciate your good attention with patience. By the power of listening to this sutta, we acquired a lot of positive energy. By the power of this spirituality, may your all spiritual goals meet with success, and may all of us attain the final bliss of liberation, Nibbana, emancipation.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Dukkam pantāca nirdukkhaṃ, bhayam pantāca nirbhayam, sokam pantāca nissokāṃ, hontu sabbe pipānino. Dukin pelena sat, dukin midetva, bien pelena sat, bien neti vetva. Sovinte vena sat, somnas vetva, nitin me hama sat, suepat vetva.